welcome to Crime Time 911. So, for those of you like myself who were born in the 80s, you grew up in the 80s, you know that life back then was more laid back. You know, small children, as little as 4, 5, 6 years old could go outside and play basically unsupervised. I used to do it. I remember, maybe not quite that young, but, I would go out and play with my cousins. We would run around outside, ride bikes, all the things. Our parents weren't like right there watching us the whole time. They knew that we were, they knew that we knew that we were allowed to stay in a certain area. Of course, they would check on us every once in a while, but it wasn't like it is today where you have to worry as much. And there seems to be more threats today than there ever was. This world is becoming really dangerous. So this next story takes place back in 1984. So on November 1st, 1984, it was an ordinary Thursday in Montreal, Quebec. It was the day after Halloween, so the city was sort of settling down, getting back into routine after all the trick-or-treaters going out the night before, maybe even some people vandalizing, like teens like to do sometimes, all that sort of stuff. It's a normal day, nothing unusual. Everybody's just doing their regular thing, going to work, going grocery shopping. Kids are playing outside, having fun. All the things that, normally would happen, in the day-to-day life. However, by sundown, everything changes. 3 little boys end up vanishing within hours of each other. The ages of these little boys were 4, 8, and 12. So that's pretty scary in itself, especially the 4-year-old. That's pretty scary that three boys went missing within hours of each other on the same night. Like, what is happening? What is going on here? This case becomes one of Quebec's most haunting cold cases ever, because even though 2 of the boys were found, one of them has still not been found to this day. So let's get into it a little bit more here. So like I said, 3 boys disappeared on the same day. I apologize. Even though I am Canadian, I don't speak French. So if I mispronounce any of these French names throughout this episode, I certainly apologize. I'm going to do my best. So we have Maurice Vines, who is the 4-year-old. He was from Central Sud. Wilton Lubin, who was the 12-year-old, he was from Hochelaga Maisonneuve. And Sébastien Métivier, who is the 8-year-old, was also from the same place as Wilton. So the 2 boys lived basically in the same area, and then Maurice was from a different area, I'm assuming somewhere close by though. So like I said, all 3 of these boys all vanished within hours of each other, which makes me question, like, how does somebody snatch one boy and then get away with it to the point where he goes and grabs 2 more? Like, that's unusual to me. I've never, in all of the in all of the true crimes that I've covered myself or even heard of, it's unusual or it's not common for a perpetrator to take multiple victims within hours of each other in the same day. If they're going to take multiple victims, they're going to, take them, in a group, or snatch 2 friends at the same time, or do one day and then maybe, a couple days later do the next, or you know what I mean? Like, it's weird to me anyways, in my opinion. This is a weird situation on like what was this person? Obviously I don't know what this person was thinking, but it's just weird. Let's just leave it at that. So like I said, Sebastian and Wilton were from the same area. It's reported that those 2 boys were actually out playing together on November 1st. So there we have it. So, Maurice is off, the 4-year-old, playing, in his neighborhood. I don't know if he was playing alone or if he was with a friend. And then, however many hours later, Sebastian and Wilton are outside playing and they get taken by supposedly the same person. So let's start with Maurice. So Maurice is outside of his house. He's playing, having a good time, doing what 4-year-old little boys do. Maybe he's playing hide and seek with some friends. Maybe he's playing with his Tonka trucks and, Tonka dump trucks. I don't know if you grew up in the 80s, especially as a boy, you probably had those metal heavy duty Tonka trucks. I know my husband, I believe he actually still has some out in our garage or in our backyard somewhere. And these things, like, they don't make Tonka trucks today like they did back then. These things were metal. But anyway, so, maybe he's playing with that. Maybe he's riding his bike. Maybe he's, I don't know, skipping rope or playing hopscotch or whatever. He's out there having a good time as a 4-year-old little boy, not a care in the world, just, doing what he wants to do, having a good time before his mom eventually, calls him in for maybe dinner or, bath or bedtime or whatever the case may be. So eventually his family noticed that he was gone. And, obviously that must have been panic stricken, especially again for such a young child, a 4-year-old, like he's barely just out of his toddler years. So the family begins searching immediately. They search everywhere and anywhere that they can, think of, and they can't find him anywhere. Because Maurice was so young, they didn't wait very long before they reported his disappearance to the police. Naturally, I would probably do it the minute I realized that my kid was gone. Better to be safe than sorry, right? So then moving on to Wilton and Sebastian, they were last seen playing together, doing what an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old boy do, probably similar things than what the 4-year-old would do, possibly riding bikes together. Maybe they were playing basketball. Maybe they were, playing baseball or throwing, playing catch or whatever it is that they do, that 8 and 12-year-old little boys do. They were just out again, having a good time. So eventually the parents of both these boys, Wilton and Sebastian, realize, wait a minute, our kids aren't home yet. They haven't come home at all. As for Sebastian, he actually didn't return home from church. So I guess he went to like a church thing. And I'm guessing he would have ran into Wilton on the way home, got distracted, playing with Wilton, and then, both boys disappear. So once the parents realize, wait a minute, our kids are missing, they go out separately and they start doing the same thing as Maurice's parents. They start looking around, they start searching, they contact the authorities almost right away as well, because even though they're older, they're still quite young. So, they want to make sure that the police are involved in that, they can have as much help in locating their children as they possibly could have, right? However, the initial police response was actually quite disappointing. They didn't treat any of these incidences as abductions at first. They assumed that they were all runaways. Really? Like, maybe the 12-year-old and 8-year-old, maybe, but a 4-year-old, I don't know any 4-year-olds that are going to run away. Like, no way. I can't imagine it. And, maybe they might threaten it. Like, oh, I'm not allowed to have ice cream before dinner, so I'm going to run away. They're not going to do it. They're 4. Like, I'm lost for words. Like, this is incredible. It's disgusting. I can't even believe that, the police would even think about that at such a young age. That's insane. So that basically gives the perpetrator that much more time to do whatever it is that he's going to do with these boys, because the police aren't believing that these boys are actually abducted, that they're actually in danger. They just think, they've run off, whatever, they'll be back. That's a bunch of BS in my mind, honestly. That's Anyway, so to go along with the fact that the police don't want to, treat it as an abduction, they want to just believe that they're runaways, there was no immediate media alerts either. Now, I don't know how much media alerts would have happened back then. Probably, I guess, just the standard news reporter saying, look out for this missing child and give the description, maybe show a picture. But none of that had happened right away or as fast as it should have. There was also no connection made early in the disappearances of all three boys. So nobody thought, well, I guess the families probably didn't know that the other boys had been missing at the time because there was no media coverage. But wouldn't the police be like, hey, we've got three young boys disappearing within a couple of hours of each other. Doesn't this seem a little weird? Like, isn't this something that maybe we should look into a little bit more? Like, that would be my thought process if I was a police officer. That would 100% be my thought process. In later reports, it said that the investigation was very, very slow and poorly executed, which I 100% agree. From everything that I've already just said, I'm still in disbelief. Because they weren't getting much of a police response, the families and neighbors decided to go search themselves. So they started conducting searches of alleys, parks, stairwells, anywhere and everywhere that they can think that, one of three young boys would be if they, were playing hide and seek or wanting to hide from their parents or, ran off because they were scared, right? They started knocking on doors. They started asking questions to the neighbors. They started asking people on the street, have you seen these boys? Eventually, they would contact the media when the police didn't, basically. So when they realized the police weren't going to do anything to contact the media, the parents said, you know what? We're going to do it then. If the police aren't going to do their job, we're going to contact the media. We're going to tell the media that our children are missing and that, give them the description, give them the pictures, do all the things that we need to do to get our boys' faces out there in hopes that somebody will see them and recognize them and hopefully bring them home safely. So with all of this going on, eventually that pressure kind of forces police into helping with the investigation at that point, which is sickening to me. Absolutely sickening. I can't even believe that, I get it. Back in the 80s, it was a different time, but I don't think it's justified that they didn't respond until the parents basically, I'm assuming I would have told, like if I was the parents, I would have told the media that the police were not doing anything, that they thought that, my 4-year-old was a runaway. Like, come on. Give your head a shake. So eventually, within a few days of the disappearances, Maurice Vine's body would be discovered. So that's a pretty sad outcome. And I'm sure that his parents were devastated. I know I definitely would be. And you know what? I'd be even more furious at the police because, maybe if they had acted faster, perhaps Maurice could have been located, faster. Maybe he could have been saved. But because the police refused to, alert the media and get their presence out there, potentially this could be why Maurice was not found alive. I know in most cases, with child abductions, they're usually not alive past, an hour or two at most. They're usually unalived fairly quickly. So maybe, the lack of police cooperation might not have made a difference. Maybe, but you can't help but wonder. That would be my first thought as a parent. You know what I mean? Like, you can't help but wonder. So within a few weeks after November 1st, when these boys disappeared, Wilton's body would be found. They were both confirmed that they were intentionally unalived. So, it wasn't an accident. This was intentionally done by somebody. However, Sébastien was never found to this day. So Sébastien is still out there somewhere. His remains are who knows where. So hopefully one day it, could bring some peace to the parents. Hopefully one day they'll find something. But yeah, I can't even imagine like almost 40 years later and your child is still missing. That's, I couldn't even imagine what, their parents must be going through. So there was many theories in regards to what happened to these boys. Was it a single perpetrator? Was it multiple people? The list goes on. So exploring these theories, let's start with the single perpetrator. So this was the most widely accepted theory because, again, the boys were all within the same vicinity. So it made more sense, especially with Wilton and Sebastian, right? Because they were together most likely. So I can't imagine that two different people would have taken them. And with Maurice being within, that same area, most likely, he's seen Maurice snatch that boy up. And then maybe while he was driving to whatever location he was going to bring Maurice to, he saw the other two boys and, grabbed them in an opportunity, or maybe he did whatever he was going to do with Maurice, and then his sick fantasies or whatever the hell weren't satisfied. So maybe he went hunting again. I don't know. Obviously, I'm speculating, but the single perpetrator theory makes the most sense to me, at least. There is also the multiple offenders theory, which was considered, but again, less likely. Like I said, it doesn't make as much sense. Perhaps maybe there was two. Maybe one person took Maurice and then another person took the other two boys. But I feel like that's a less likely situation. And then, of course, the stranger abduction. So somebody took them that the boys didn't know, which I'm assuming that's most likely the case, since there was nothing that I saw in public records. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, that indicated that it was any relation to any of the boys or anybody that the families might have known. I'm also assuming that even if that was the case, they might not have known, because there doesn't seem to be any suspects involved in this case at all. So that makes it hard too. If you don't know who you're looking for, how are you supposed to, bring justice for the family, get some closure for the family, right? So because Sebastian was never found, the last theory is that perhaps he was taken by somebody else because of the fact that he was never found. He was the only one not found. So, and I guess that sort of makes sense as well, but I don't know how I don't know how Wilton and Sebastian would have been taken by two different people since they were together. That's the part that I have have a hard time wrapping my head around. So unless they maybe were playing together and then went their separate ways to go home, and then one perpetrator that took Maurice took Wilton as well, and then it just so happened that another sadistic piece of garbage was in the area and took Sebastian and buried him in a different location, maybe took him to a different province, maybe I don't even know. But that's sort of the theory, that possibly Sebastian was taken by somebody else, only because his remains were never found. So what do you think about this case? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to hit that follow button so you don't miss any episodes. Thank you for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.